week's Grinder School Cash Game Series replay. This is Grinder School Cash Series Week 8, I believe, and this is a full ring Norman Hold'em on PokerStars. As you can see here, we're at 5-0, and I've got about 9 hands I'd like to go over with you regarding some of the play that I saw. And granted, there were a lot more mistakes than the 9 hands that I saw, but these are going to be the most interesting, and I would say the most content that I can provide. I could have found, definitely could have found more, but I felt like some of the craziness between Colossus and Pyrotos was getting in the way of actual poker strat, so I didn't want to get into too much of the way they played their hands. But let's go on. Let's go ahead and start right away. So the first hand that we have here, we have Pyrotos raising it up 4x in isolation of the under the gun limper. Now, Pyrotos is doing this with an extremely wide range, 9-7 suited, and this is certainly not going to be a raise for value. Now, isolation and c-betting is something that I cover in my How to Master Full Ring series, which, if you guys haven't seen it yet and you guys are cash game players, even if you are 6-max, you should watch that too, because it applies to both 6-max and Full Ring. So Pyrotos isolates them up here, which is perfectly normal, as long as you can play it well post-flop. The thing is, the rest of this entire hand is kind of boring until we get to the river, or actually the turn bet size. This is what I want to talk to you about. So, what happens here is that this is a classic mistake that I see like ton of players. A lot of my students have they don't really have the insight for the next street, or maybe they're not paying attention. But when you go to make a value bet like this here, we have the nuts. All right, our goal is to get a stack in by the river. Yet you guys are too busy thinking about not wanting him to fold that you're afraid to bet the proper amount in order to get him to get the rest of his money in. So what happens here, Pyrotos bet 65 cents, and we're left with with over a pot size bet left, even though it's not very much. And the thing is, when we go ahead and get the rest of his stack in, our bet looks like an over bet. What we want to do is when we have the nuts in the situation, we want to make it look like a river bet is actually like smaller. Want to make it look like it's smaller than it really is, not make it look larger than it really is, like in this instance here when you have an over pot size bet left. But the easiest way to counteract that in this situation is just to go from 65 cents to 75 cents. Now, you guys would be pretty silly if you guys think that that much more of a hand range is going to be folding to 10 cents more bet here on the turn. Whereas if you bet 10 cents, the pot increases by 20 cents, and the effective stack goes down by 10. So therefore, the pot will be right around like 255, and he's going to be having 235 behind. So therefore, you have less than a pot size bet. The larger you make it here on this turn that he's going to be calling, the better off you are, because one, you don't want to give him too many odds to draw to the flush. Like in this instance here, we're not going to be able to fold to a river heart. So in theory, he's getting like almost 2-to-1. I guess No, yeah, he's getting over 2-to-1. He's getting 2.6-to-1 on a 4-to-1 draw if he has a flush draw. So he really only needs to make $1.30 on the river in order for his call here to be plus EV if he has a flush draw. So you've got to balance that out with not just going for value, but also with a flush. Also with protecting against the flush in this instance. Now it'd be different if we weren't planning on paying off the flush. But like if we had, let's say we had like Ace Jack, right? We could very easily fold the river if the flush hits. Now granted, that doesn't necessarily mean we want to be changing our bet sizing all that much, right? We would still want to be able to jam the river in if he misses the flush, so we can get maximum value. But like in a hand like this, like we want to be betting even larger. Maybe we should be betting 85 cents here. So if we bet 85 cents, he's going to be getting maybe 2-to-1, and we're going to cut down on his implied odds. So I guess in theory, in my opinion here, what you guys should just be doing is making sure you guys are thinking 1, 2, 3 streets ahead before you make an action. Now I know it's really hard for you guys to do that when you guys are just starting out, but you do have a time bank, right? You have 30 seconds. You don't need to make every play instantaneous. If it takes you an extra 3 seconds to think about what's going to happen, or to add up the bet sizes before you do it. What I usually do is for an easy guide to bet sizing, all you have to do is whatever bet you're going to make, right, double that. So it's $1.30 plus the money he has in the pot. It would be $2.42, right? And then you have to do some quick mental math here, and it's like, 300, like 3.1 minus 0.65, or however you want to do it, like 31 minus 6.5. Like either way, you should be thinking like, well, that's not like you don't know the exact amount, but what you should be thinking is like it's going to be very close. You know what I mean? And that's something that you don't want to make a mistake on. So let's just go ahead and make it a little bit larger and say ourselves something. It's like if I know 65 cents bet here is going to be extremely close to being an over pot size bet in the river, then maybe I should make a 75-cent bet and not even have to worry. You know what I mean? And then just be like, well, I know 75 cents, I'm going to be fine. Let's go ahead and make that bet. So this is a very classic bet sizing mistake, and it's something that I talk a lot about with my students. And usually, if people have people have trouble with coming with bet sizing and stuff like that, or how should you do it, I do send them to the book Professional Element Hold'em as a good guide. It's one of the books I recommend, one of the few books I recommend, and that book talks a lot about hand planning and stack to pot ratios and commitment thresholds and stuff. And bet sizing is something that's very important in that book, and it's stressed largely. And I recommend it completely if you guys are pretty unsure on in what bets we should be making and when. But all right, we're going to go on to the next hand. So in this instance here, I end up with pocket queens. Oh, I remember this hand now. Yeah. And Mr. Chevy Celeb re-raises me. Now, in theory, right, this hand looks pretty bad by him, or for him, right? And in some aspects, like pre-flop here is pretty bad by him, because he needs to be 3-betting me with a hand range, right, that he can't actually be calling with for value, right, or even be plus EV calling with. So the question you got to ask yourself is, well, what hands would he be calling me with? What hands would I call with here? And then what hands are obvious folds? And then which hands are the ones that are in the middle that I really don't know if I can be calling you with, or if I can be re-raising you, or if I should be folding. An example of that would be, I bring Poker Stove over here. Right, let's just say for an example, he can at least play like any pocket pair, and he's ace king and ace king kind of hands are very obvious. We're gonna be playing those hands, and even ace queen suited. So then the question comes, right? The rest of these Broadway cards right now are actually all kind of questionable. Can we call them? Can we not call them? He knows I'm probably opening up a fairly wide range, so some of these hands are still gonna be plus EV calls. I was ace jack down here. And we know some of them are probably going to be very standard folds, right? Like Jack 10 and Queen 10. Like, these are all going to be folds. So, the question you got to ask yourself is, what about hands like Ace 10 and King Jack and King 10? Maybe even King Jack you still want to be calling. King Jack suited, rather. So, we kind of have a narrow range of hands that we should be bluffing with. And we could also be taking into account, 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited. These are all potential hands as well that we can throw in our bluffing range. These suited connectors. The thing is, we don't want to be going all the way down here to Jack 6 suited, right? Because if you're re-raising Jack 6 suited, then theoretically, why aren't you re-raising Jack 7, Jack 8, Jack 9, and Jack 10? Because those hands are all have a lot more value than, say, a hand like Jack 6 suited is, because they're all connected. So when you're talking about like hands about re-raising, stick with up here. And now granted, like let's just say, you could talk about like, well, I'm going to be doing it frequency-wise. But even if, say, you were going to be doing each one of these hands, rather than re-raising Jack 9 suited 100% of the time in this situation, right? We're just talking about hand combinations and stuff like that. Let's just say you were to re-raise each one of these hands 20% of the time to equal the exact same amount of combinations, right? So Jack 9 suited, 4 combinations 100% of the time. So you're re-raising me as a bluff 4% of the time. So let's just say, 4 combinations worth. So let's just say then, so 100%, you're re-raising each one of these 20% of the time that you get it. You roll a dice. Let's just say you roll a 20-sided dice, and every time it comes up 1 through 5, you're going to be, or 1 through 4, you're going to be re-raising me as a bluff, right? But the thing is, let's just go ahead and take Jack 6 suited out, and then we could just re-raise these 4 hands 25% of the time. You know what I mean? So instead of 1 through 4, 1 through 5, you're going to be re-raising each one of these. Now, it's a little bit odd, but why would you, again, like re-raise these kind of marginal hands, but then fold a hand like Jack 9 suited to a raise? That's kind of the thing I talk about too against my students, is that, like, think about your entire range as a whole whenever you're playing a hand, right? So just because you're re-raising a hand like Jack 6, right? Understand what that means when you re-raise a hand like what happens when you get Jack 9 suited and Jack 10 suited, right? Because everything is like all one big hand range. Everything merges together and everything is related on each other. So at the same time, it's like, why would you fold Queen Jack here, Queen Jack offsuit, but then re-raise Jack 6 suited? I see it all the time. And you guys too, because you guys are afraid to play a hand like Queen Jack because it's dominated. Well, at the same time, like Jack 6 suited is even more dominated than Queen Jack, and you're just pretty much playing it for the flush because you can't really play for top pair. The Jack 6 suited hits top pair just as often, if not less often, than a hand like Queen Jack does. And you're going to be losing just as big of a pot when you do hit top pair. So, the act of re-raising him like itself by Bishop Chevy Celeb, I don't have a problem with. It's just the hand itself. You know what I mean? Like when you're re-raising as a bluff, you need to have both one, the correct hand, and 2, the correct situation. He picked a good situation, just not a very good hand to do it with. Now, me knowing that I have a very wide range, and knowing that Chevy Celeb could very easily be bluffing me, it doesn't make too much sense for me to be 4-betting in this situation. I would be 4-betting other player at this table. I'm not going to mention who. But in this instance, I'm like, well, Chevy Celeb could very easily have a hand like Complete Air. Alright, so what am I going to be doing with a hand like Queens here? We could go for check raise. We could go for, we could lead out. Thing is, if we lead out, it doesn't change anything from the fact that we could very easily, leading out here is just like 4-betting pre-flop, I guess, right? We're only going to be getting called by hands that do very well against us, against the same hand range, right? Like, he's going to be folding out Ace-King on this flop. He might unfold Ace-King pre-flop, and that's kind of the reason, I don't mind getting in against Ace-King pre-flop, but right now, we're trying to get back some value from all of his bluffs as well. So we check here, and the first problem that he makes is when he bets this flop. What kind of hand range could he put me on that this is a pure utterly value bet, right? Let's just say, for example, that on this board, on a Jack 9-9 board, okay, I'm loading this up through PokerStove. On a Jack 9-9 board, what am I calling re-raises with pre-flop? Right. Even if I have like any pair and Ace-King and Ace-Queen in my hand range, and maybe even like some of these hands like this, like King-Queen suited or something like that, or even Ace-Jack suited, right? Like if I have these hands in my hand range, which is very suspect because chances of me calling with like 2s through like 6s is not correct at all because I definitely would be folding those. So this is my calling range here. Alright, Jack 6 is certainly ahead, in my opinion, of this hand range. I want to go ahead and make sure if that is the case. On a Jack high board, I believe it should be. Yeah, so even though we're ahead of the hand range here, that is not reason for you to value bet, right? A value bet only defined by when you get called by worse hands. Well, the thing is, I'm not going to be, if he gets called by any worse hand, it's going to be like 10s and 8s, right? Ace-King and King-Queen all fold to continuation bet. So we take away all my air hands, right? You go into, and I can still keep an 8s and 10s here. But what happens is Jack 6 suited goes from a favorite to a 2-1 underdog, which therefore you're just kind of turning your hand into a bluff, because now you're hoping I fold a hand like Queens or Kings of some kind, which is not going to happen. You know what I mean? So at the same time, if I do fold here, even though you might be happy that I fold, in all reality, I'm just folding hands like Ace-King and Ace-Queen, which I might be betting on the next street. So if you're going to be putting 65 cents here on this board, you might as well be checking behind here and letting me do something on this next street. You did, in fact, make a good turn play, and that is checking behind, realizing that you are most certainly going to be behind now that I called. But this is actually where this strategy comes becomes interesting, and it also depends on like later in the hand. Like the reason why I chose this hand is because there's also a hand in the future that I played against Dozer that is very similar to what happens on this river. So I bet 15 cents, which a lot of the times it would be a very silly bet. It might even be a silly bet here. But my goal is, like, I know that Mr. Chevy Celeb doesn't really have anything right now. Like, because if he had kings and aces, pre-flop, or, like, you know what I mean? He's not checking behind this turn with kings and aces. So, he's either got, like, ace-king, ace-queen. He's got some kind of complete air bluff, or some kind of complete air, or he's, you know what I mean, he's going to have some kind of, like, flush, I guess, right? Because that's really the only thing he could have. Some kind of nut hand. And so the reason why I bet 15 cents is either to, 1, get a call out of ace-king or ace-queen, or to 2, kind of like merge his, try to find a way to get him to bluff me a little bit. Right? Because if I were to bet $1.50 here and he were to raise me, I'd be in a pretty sick spot, and I would pretty much have to fold. Okay? And he's not going to be bluffing me very much at all if I bet $1.50 here. So I pretty much only have to deal with his calling range. And in all reality, he's not going to be calling me all that much on this river because my hand is extremely face up at this point. So my only goal is to see if I can get him to at least bluff raise me at least X percentage of the time to balance out the fact that he's going to be raising me on this river when he hits the flush. And everything else, he might call me with a hand like ace high or king high. You know what I mean? Ace high with ace king or ace queen. Now, if I had ace king on this board, there's a high percentage of time I would actually be bluffing in this situation just to see if I can't get another ace king to fold. Just because if he checks behind the turn here, chances are he's going to have ace king a lot. And that's where betting with a hand like ace queen and ace king becomes profitable on this river. So, even though I know my hand's kind of face up, that might not stop him from bluffing me. And I can at least get some value, because ace king has such a hard time folding on the river when he gets, like, 18 to 1, 17 to 1, or whatever kind of price I'm getting him here. 16.1 to 1 up here. It's so hard for anybody to fold. Like, remember limit hold'em? Nobody ever folds limit hold'em. This is that same reason. When you give somebody 16 to 1 to call, they have to call you. They have to see at least what you have. And in all reality, it wouldn't be a bad call with ace high if he did call it. So yeah, like, that's the reason why I bet. So when he raises me here, like, I'm not folding. There's a difference between this kind of a bet and a blocking bet. A blocking bet is a bet that you bet and then fold in the river. Usually I'm not too big of a fan of a blocking bet. But they do have their situations where they are profitable. Now, this is more of like an inducing kind of a bluff inducing bluff raise bet. And if he raised me, and you know what I mean, and my goal was to induce the bluff raise, then obviously I can't fold and that was my goal. So when you guys are trying to induce the bluff, when you get what you were trying to have happen, you can't then fold it. Granted, I was worried about him having the flush, and I'm not surprised here to see him have the flush, given the fact that, like, it's a very common situation. Now, I actually didn't expect him to have jack six of diamonds. I always expected him to have like a hand like 10-8. But the thing is, what I was saying was, if I didn't expect him to have ace queen because we have the queen of diamonds, so like, I was either that or like ace king of diamonds. I'm sorry if that was a little rough there. I had to pause the video real quick because I was getting a phone call. Who calls me? I don't know. All right, I'm gonna go on into the next hand here. And obviously call it. I missed it. All right, next hand. All right, so let's go ahead and see what happens here. Ninja, an unknown player here. He's not a Grind School member. He raises it up, and this is Dive All In is Sean SS1 from Grinder School. He's also a recent student of mine, and something that we talk about quite a bit is leading out. Leading out in this situation is not really what you want to do as a bluff, okay? The reason why you don't want to lead out here as a bluff, because let's just think of our opponent's hand range for a second. Alright, he's raising in the hijack, right? Even if you were to include like any Broadway, like any pair in a situation, alright, and you could even throw in a lot of these like more marginal kind of hands here, suit connectors, you know what I mean? The chances of him folding of this hand range, right, at all, on a board that has Jack 10-8 is like nil. You know what I mean? Every single hand on this that I gave you right here has hit that flop, other than like 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, and I guess 7s, right? Every other hand hit this board in some way, right? They either had a gut shot a pair, or open in a straight draw, a set, two pair, something or another. Which, this is not a very good board to bluff at. Same thing by him, right? If he were wanting to bluff you on this board, it's a very bad board to bluff. Alright, so even though we have a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw, which is something that I usually recommend a lot when we're leading out here, the fold equity we have is nil, and when we have no fold equity, then we probably shouldn't be betting out. So it'd be a pretty classic check fold. Now, if we were to check raise, we might have a little bit more fold equity because he's going to be folding a lot of his gut shots, but I don't really care for either of those plays because this is just too drawy of a board. Now, when we get raised in this situation, this is a very classic, very easy fold. Right? I mean, there is nothing really. Why are we calling here? Is the question I have to ask. Like, we don't have anything. We have the bottom end of a gut shot. That's it. That's all we have. You know what I mean? Yet we still call. And I don't really understand why. Because even if we do hit a 9 on this next street, we're not going to be too comfortable getting the money all in because we're going to have the bottom end of a gut shot. Alright, and then once we hit the ace, we pretty much feel like we're committed and we have to show it down. And it's not something, I guess the river bet we have to call, but I mean, I'm just not a big fan. Like we would be able to save $2 in this situation here if we would just go ahead and fold the turn, or fold the flop. It would be different, however, if we check and our opponent checks behind, then we hit the ace on the turn, then we check call down. That's a little bit different. All right, but before we even do that, let's go ahead and talk about pre-flop. I didn't even get to that. You know what I mean? Ace 7 offsuit pre-flop is not a very good call at all. All right, we need to have at least ace 10 here, and even then ace 10 offsuit would be a very marginal call. Ace 10 suited would be slightly better call. It all depends on how much Ninja open raises. Now, I believe in this instance, like Ninja was a pretty big donk, but playing out of position, we need hands that we can play for 3 streets of value with, and we give him 4 streets post flop with nothing but top pair, no kicker. It's not really something that is going to show a lot of profit in the long run. In fact, it's going to be a very losing play. Let's go on here. Okay, so in this hand, Pyrotos goes ahead and raises it up 3x to pocket 7s. Okay, another not very good call, in my opinion, out of the big blind with ace-deuce suited. If we had 9-8 suited here, it would be a pretty good call. The thing is, ace-deuce suited only really hits one draw, that's the flush draw. 9-8 suited hits a lot of straight draws to go with it, like gut shot draws, and it's gonna get a lot more value than say a hand like ace-deuce. And again, dive all in flops the flush draw. Well, no, not again, but he flops the flush draw here, and he decides to lead out. Now, there are 2 or 3 problems with this hand, with the way this is played right now. One, we're leading out into 4 people as a bluff, right? Without any kind of action. We don't really know what kind of hand Pyrotos has, and that's not that great either. Now, what would happen if we check the flop and it checks around? That's good for us, right? We don't want to have to pay to hit our draw. Like, we want to see our draw for cheap. And given the fact that we have like the nut flush draw, I love playing the nut flush draw aggressively, but like within reason. So when Pyrotos raises it up, Pyrotos won't raise it up, but like when Pyrotos calls, it's very obvious that he has a pair of some kind, because he's not calling you with anything but a pair. You have the ace of hearts. So the only other 2 hands you could have is the king, queen of hearts, and that's it. Because king jack has you beat, right? So you really don't want to be playing against a king jack of hearts. And in all honesty here, what would happen, like Pyrotos probably doesn't bet this flop. But if he does, right, he's not going to be betting you off your hand too much. Your goal is to see the river as cheaply as you can without having to pay money. So by betting out here, you are forcing yourself already to have to pay to hit a draw, when if you check, there's a chance you might not have to pay for it. Now, if this flop checked around, right, and the turn came when whatever kind of random card, then bet out. But bet out an amount that is going to get folds, right? This is less than a half pot size bet. I usually don't recommend betting anything less than like 2/3 of the pot. Like, I would start with 2/3 pot here, which would be 40 cents. And then go up or down 1 big blind or 2 big blinds accordingly. But even still, like 25 cents is just way too small with what you're trying to accomplish. You're not trying to go for value here. You're trying to get people to fold. So in my opinion, like a pot size bet here is going to be more profitable than a 25 cents bet. I don't really like pot size bets, but I mean if you're looking in terms of profitability, like pot size is going to be better than half pot. Pyro's call is obvious, and I think his call is fairly loose. I mean, I'd have a hard time calling, but we know Pyro's likes to play loose. And Dive All In continues to lead out here on this on this turn. And in all honesty, I bet you if you were to bet larger, Pyrotos just folds. I mean, it's not necessarily incorrect for you to be playing your draw that this aggressively. That's not really not too bad of a scenario to be in. But when you are playing aggressively, bet larger so you can at least have some fold equity here. I probably wouldn't be going the 2-barrel because I wouldn't have bet the flop to begin with. But once Pyrotos calls again, right, we end up rivering a good card for our hand if we have ace-2 suited. Okay, we have the gut shot, or we had a gut shot. So if our opponent has an overpair, or a set, or whatever he feels still playing us, then most likely we're ahead. Okay, but if he raises us, we really can't do a whole lot, right? So I don't mind value betting this river at all, right? Like this is a good spot for us to value bet. I probably wouldn't be betting this large now. Like why weren't we betting this large earlier when we had the nut draw, trying to get him to fold? Now that we want to get some value, we're betting really large. I would bet small again. I would bet like $1.50 here. Try not to scare away a hand like pocket tens or ace jack or whatever. Betting this large is only going to get all of his bigger pairs to fold, which is what we're going to get a lot of value from. But once he raises us on this river, okay, once he raises us, we have to fold here, just because what's he raising us on the river that isn't the nuts, right? He's waiting to get to a 4 straight to raise you with a set. No, that's not happening. He's not bluffing you here either. So the reason why we can bet $1.50 is because we can bet fold the river to $1.50 bet. It's really hard for you to bet fold when it's like less than a min raise back to you. I understand, but that's the reason why you don't choose this bet size, right? So we should be betting smaller and then folding to the raise, because what the hell is he raising us that isn't for value? Now it is a bit awkward to see Pyrotos call 2 streets there with the 2 small bets. I probably wouldn't be making those calls because most of the time Dive All In's going to be having like a jack there, but I mean, I guess he was right on his read, so I mean I can't really argue against him there. Okay, so how did this hand play out? Oh, I remember this hand now. So this is, remember the second hand that we went over here with Mr. Chevy Slub. This is going to be the later in the tournament. I think Mr. Chevy Slub have already left, and GE00 is the new current constructor Dozer, and it's kind of interesting when I don't really know how Dozer plays in all reality. You know, I've never really played with him before. I'm sure he's never played with me before, but in some aspect, like, we both know that we're both of us are tags and are capable of probably many, many tricks, and so it's kind of hard to not give us credit for anything, right? So when you're dealing with something like that, you kind of have the option to either one, like, play fairly standard, or two, to just try and outplay him at every opportunity that you possibly can. When I'm out of position, it's so hard to outplay an opponent that I usually just try and play standard and try to merge my range a little bit. Like in this instance here, like I have a queen. I call pre-flop just because I know like I can get, getting 2-1 suited Broadway card. He's raising a lot of garbage. I know that I have a lot of equity against his hand range, so I can call. But post-flop, I'm going to be playing pretty standard. You know what I mean? I'm not willing to automatically see a showdown in this situation, but I'm not going to be folding the flop either to a single bet. He bets really large, and this is kind of odd. He's only betting large for 2 reasons. One, as a big value bet, or 2, just because there's not really a lot of cards he can barrel with on the next street. You know what I mean? And that's pretty much my thought process. It's like, well, he can't really barrel out on the next street, so that's why he's betting so large, or he's doing it for value. And the thing is, if he bets really large again on the next street, it's a pretty trivial fold for me, just because I have middle pair no kicker, and I'm not really looking to call down like 3 pot size bets for value from him. And so I do plan on checking here, planning to check fold. and one of these checks behind, I know that like his big bet on the flop then was not for value, but in fact was a bluff, and so I'm fairly certain that I'm ahead of the hand right now. But we kind of hit the nuts here on the river. The question is, like, do we check to him again, or do we bet out? Now, the thing is, if we were to check again, it's very obvious that we have made hand, because whenever you check call the flop, right, you either have some kind of bluff or you're going to have some kind of made hand. If we had a bluff on the river, we would be betting it out. Why wouldn't we be betting it out, right? Like, this is a good card for us to represent as a bluff, so he's going to be expecting us to bet all of our bluffs. Okay? When we check, yeah, we're representing weakness, but it's very obvious we have a showdownable hand. Because if we didn't have a showdownable hand, we'd be betting. So, that is why I decided to lead out here. But I lead out very small. Last time I bet like 15 cents in the big pot. I bet 20 cents in an 80-cent pot here. For the same theory. Like, I know that Dozer is aggressive, or he's capable of a lot of things, and so I'm just trying to induce a bluff raise of some kind. Chances of him having a queen are very much nil, just because he wouldn't be betting so large in the flop with a queen, like with a random queen, trying to get me to fold or whatever, because there's really any value in that kind of a bet size. And so when he raises me up here, which is what I was getting, like, obviously I'm not going to be folding my queen. Now, we can talk about the reason why I don't think his value raise or his bluff raise is very profitable on the river, just because he's trying to represent the queen and he really can't. But that's something too that, like, it's not really an expensive bluff by him to take it down. It's causing him like $1.20 to win $1.02, so it doesn't have to work all that often. Now, granted, I think he could have chosen a lower bet size and have it work the same amount, like a raise size to 80 cents. It's probably going to show a lot more of a profit than, say, a raise size to $1.20, just because it has to work 50% less often, I do believe, because of the raise size. No, 33% less often. And what am I calling it $1.20? Then I'm not going to be, what am I calling it 80 cents raise to? But I'm not calling it $1.20 raise to. So the lowest size you can make it as a bluff is the more profitable it's going to be. And this is an example too, I guess, verifying the line hooking as Mr. Chevy Celeb, that it is possible to induce a bluff raise on the river by betting really small when you're playing against an aggressive opponent. Because not all the time you get raised on the river is that you're facing against the nuts. But as long as you're inducing, like if I were to bet 60 cents here and he were to raise me, I would be in a crappy spot because I didn't induce a bluff raise. So when he raises me, you know what I mean, then I'm in a very tough spot. But I can at least try to induce a bluff raise, and so when I do get raised, I'm in a much better spot than, say, like if I were to bet larger. But I did cover both of these hands in the podcast recently. In terms of, I think I covered it from a different angle. So if you guys want to hear me talk about, profitability of plays and when making a play on the river, they don't always work, then, tune into the podcast session there. So in this hand, Dozer Raising under the gun, and there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, and both of them are, one of them is pre-flop here. One, like Dozer raises ace-high obviously under the gun, not too bad of a play. It is marginal. I expect him to be able to play it properly because he's he's a very good player. I wouldn't expect a lot of subscribers to be able to play it properly, so I don't recommend doing it. That's not saying that you guys can't ever do it, just because there are some times when you can raise it and have it be profitable. The first thing I want to say is that you can't call 10-9 suited out of position here in the big blind and show a profit with it. You can't even call a hand like 2s through 6s in this situation and show a profit with it. Facing like a much better, facing a better player than you, or a player who's more skilled, who's going to be able to play you, and also has position on you. You can't really be playing marginal hands out of position. Like, you have to make sure that when you do play a hand, you have an equity edge against him, and you have position on him. So in this instance, right, we end up actually flopping the nuts, or relatively the nuts, but yet we still don't check raise him here. Now, the reason why I check raise here would be probably pretty profitable is because, like, the flop came an ace, okay, and most of his under the gun raising range is going to have an ace in it, and if it doesn't, and he's completely bluffing here, they're not going to get any value from him anyway. But the thing is, so like any value from him on a later street, because there's not really any boards he can be bluffing. So slow playing here is pretty bad. Our opponent is not going to be bluffing into us a hand like kings or queens with the heart. So he's taking those hands behind. So like Dozer's hand range here is almost exclusively Ace X or Complete Air. And when we're playing against that, we might as well check raise here and try to get value from Ace X, even though he's folding everything probably but Ace King of Hearts, Ace King with the King of Hearts, Ace Queen with the Queen of Hearts, maybe even Ace Jack with the Jack of Hearts. Who knows? But it's still, we still need to be check raising in the situation because we don't want the fourth heart to come off. What happens when the fourth heart comes off is that one, we lose the nuts that we currently have, and two, we lose the value even if we were to win a bigger pot, we could no longer do that. So when we check calling here, it's not a very profitable play. Once we hit the 4 flush, we're pretty much stuck in the check calling the turn. Check calling the river though is not the good play because we no longer have the nuts. There's a king, queen, jack. We have the 4th nuts right now, and even though we have we flop the flush, we have to be able to get away from our hand. And if our opponent is like bluffing us 100 big blinds into a pot of 50 big blinds, then you know what? We pretty much have to let him have it because the profitability of a bluff in this instance, right? He doesn't know what kind of hand range we have. Check calling the flop. It's obvious that we have a heart of some kind, because otherwise we wouldn't be seeing the turn. I'm sorry, we wouldn't even be seeing the flop. So this is actually a pretty sick value bet by Dozer here. That thinking that you don't have a king or a queen of hearts. Like, it's obvious you don't have the king of hearts, but it's very close. It's like, man, he might have the queen of hearts, but even then, like, what kind of queen of hearts could you possibly have, other than like queen 10 of hearts, right? That's like the only, or queen 10 with the queen of hearts. That's like the only hand that you could possibly ever have here, just because like you can't have king queen of hearts. I mean, I guess you could, but you would have played different probably going up to this point. And that's really the only other hand, because you can't have the jack, because he has the jack. You can't have the ace, because the ace is already out there. So it's a very sick value bet by Dozer, but also correct. It's just not a very good call by us with a 10 high flush. I very rarely, if ever, stack off 100 big blinds deep without the nuts post-flop. Just in a board like this. I probably would be folding a lot in my hand. Keep in mind, we've also only invested 25 big blinds. So right now we're like kind of risking 100 to go after a loss of 25. I think in the long run, we'd be better off just folding in here and not calling and stacking off and paying off Dozer, which is a very sick value bet for sure. But all that could have been avoided had we just folded pre-flop. Okay, so this is one of many conversations between Pyrotos and Colossus, and I didn't choose to show you a lot of them just because a lot of them weren't very realistic or very interesting, but I think this one was a little bit interesting. No, actually, you know what? I didn't want to talk about this one at all. Pyrotos' open shoves a gut shot and Colossus calls. I actually did not want to show you that hand because there is not really much to talk about other than how two players play pretty silly. So, sorry about that. Keep going. Okay, this is the hand I actually wanted to talk to you guys about. Colossus makes a re-raise here with King Queen offsuit. Now, here's a random quiz for you guys. Think about it for a second here. Is Colossus, keep in mind Trip's hand. Okay. And Trip is a fish. Is Colossus re-raising him here as a bluff? Or is he going here for value? Okay. Now, probably the way that I've said it, it's going to be very obvious that I'm trying to say Colossus is re-raising here for value. And you can re-raise King Queen for value. In fact, you do it all the time in heads up. And when you're playing against a big fish, and I believe Trip leaked here is a fish. He's like a 40-20 out of my HUD. When you're playing against a fish like that, I don't think he's a Grand School member. I hope he's not, because then I feel bad for calling you a fish. But I don't think he is. But given the stats of a 40-20, Colossus could very easily re-raise a hand like King Queen offsuit as a bluff. Now, granted, I might not do it because 200 big blinds deep. I'm not looking to create a big pot like that out of position, but that's not saying that you can't do it for value. All right. Now, we flop the nuts. Colossus flops the nuts. King, 9. We're only worried about like two hands, pocket nines and ace king, everything, and I guess King 9, but I'm not worried about that hand. And so now we're just trying to let's go value, bet. We're not gonna be able to get stacks in the middle because we're too deep unless our opponent races us. So granted, although I'm not a big fan of Colossus's bet size here, when I first looked at this hand, I didn't actually know what Colossus had. and I would have sworn that he actually had a bluff in the situation. It didn't have the king, and so I guess in that regard it was a good bet size because I was not too sure that Colossus actually had the real hand, had a king 9 here. Keep in mind if he had aces, he might be betting the similar amount. So it's a very merge ranging bet, range merging bet. Okay. I do like this is a classic example too of when fish like overplay their hands. Like why does trip lead min raise the flop here? Is to quote unquote see where he's at. Like I know exactly what they're thinking because I see it all the time. It's a quote unquote think like I want to see where I'm at. You know what I mean? If he calls me, then I know that I'm in trouble. And it's classic incorrect thinking like that you guys have to take advantage of. And so once Colossus calls here, it's very obvious that Colossus has a pretty big hand because Colossus is folding all of his air. There's no point in Colossus calling with a hand like Ace Queen here. He might call with a gut shot like a Queen Jack. That's pretty much it. Everything else has got to be folding. And then once the 9 peels off, you know what I mean. 200 big blinds deep. Colossus has the nuts. He's only worried about pocket 9s right now, and chances of that happening are very nil. So it's pretty much like a freebie for Colossus to be check raising in this instance. And just be like, hey, let's go ahead and get this in. You know what I mean? Like, what's free roll against another ace king, or you know what I mean? Who knows? So, Trip should not have bet this turn at all. It's very obvious that, yeah, granted, once he bets out and he gets check raised, it's very obvious that Colossus has a king. How in the world he gets stuck up in the rest? You know what I mean? He loses the other 180 big blinds. It's beyond me. But Colossus's bet sizing was very good there. And if you guys read the chat in the hand history, it was pretty funny. It was that on the river Trip was like, "Oh man," you know what I mean? You can't have the king. Like on this conversation, I'm just like, and to you guys, you know, it's pretty obvious that Colossus has the king here. But I mean, let's keep in mind, I mean, Trip made a lot of bad plays, and I think the most interesting thing was Colossus's re-raising of King Queen pre-flop, which set him up to win a nice big pot post-flop from this guy. Alright, so last hand of the session. It's against me and Colossus here. My standard raise in the cutoff with Queen 10 offsuit. An unstandard call by Colossus with 8-6 offsuit. It's very obvious that Colossus is making this call to outplay me post-flop. Because there's no way he can call here for value. In fact, he can't even really call here just because it's a suited connector, because it's not even suited. So, in fact, it's a very poor call, in my opinion, to try and outplay somebody post-flop with. But, whatever, you know, I mean, I know that he's calling me pre-flop wide to outplay me, blah, blah, blah. So when you're playing against someone like that, you either have to commit mentally early in the hand, like, how are you going to play it? Are you going to let him spew money off to you? Or are you going to sit there and are you going to play there straightforward? Or are you going to sit there and like try and spew your money off at him and try to get him to fold or whatever? All right, I flop top pair. In this instance, a lot of the time, I'm going to be going like a bet check kind of line, just because. Right, first off, I'm going to be betting this flop for value because I'm going to be bluffing this flop a ton of the time, and I'm going to be merging that hand range. Just be like, all right, well, betting the flop is the easiest way for me to get value in the hand right now, because I'm going to be bluffing it quite a bit. He's going to be floating me on the flop a lot, with a lot of his hand range, and even with his complete air. And so betting the flop here for value is very easy. Now, once the turn comes, I mean, now it becomes tricky. Should we be betting again, or should we be checking it and trying to induce a bluff? The reason why I don't like betting again is it's very easy for opponent to raise us on the turn, and we are in no man's land. Like, we won't know if we're ahead. Our opponent can have a lot of bluffs, and it actually would be a really good bluff raise by Colossus here if I let out and he were to raise me like 200 big blinds deep. I'm not going to feel very good about stacking off here with like an overpair. And so in that instance, like, and I know that Colossus has a lot of floats in his hand range, like a lot of air. And so the easiest way for me to play against a lot of his air is to just go ahead and check to him and let him bluff. And that's pretty much what I do. It's like, all right, well, I'm going to check to you. I'm going to let you bluff. Like, and this way, I'll let him do it again on the river here too. And this way, I'll let him do what he originally wanted to do, and that's quote unquote try to outplay me post flop. And that is, you know what I mean, float the flop and try and bet me off whatever hand that I have. Now, granted, if there's a 4 straight comes out, like either the deuce, the 6 comes on, or the 7, I will have a tough call on the river, but chances of me folding it are probably very slim. So I mean, it's one of those hands where once I check call the turn, like if I bet flop and then check call the turn, like it's probably not a big river bet by him because you got to think about like what in the world am I doing it with, right? Like am I betting the flop and then check calling the turn with a flush draw? Probably not, because why would I just barrel with a flush draw? Would I be betting the flop with a hand like 9s through 6s? Probably not. So there, like that would make up a lot of my river folding range. Now, granted, I had bet the flop before with a hand like pocket 9s for value, because I know my opponent's gonna be folding with a lot of air. So I would play like 9 things like this sometimes. But can he really put me on the hand range? It's not really all that certain. So he's got to put me on like a 10, some kind of like marginal pair kind of hand. I have a real hard time thinking that he's going to be able to try and get me to fold all that many more hands on the river that I wouldn't have folded on the turn. But this is how you guys can take advantage of aggressive players who have position on you. Let them just check to them. You know what I mean? And like they hate it because they don't really know if you have a weak hand or you have a strong hand. And I very easily would do this with like jacks too. Like I probably wouldn't bet the turn unless I knew I would be very easily folding the 2 raise or very easily calling the raise if I do get raised. Like so if I had a hand like 9-8 or I'm sorry, like let's say if I had 8-6 of diamonds on this turn with the open end straight flush draw, it's a very easy bet call for me on the turn, right? But if I have a hand like Queen 9 of diamonds, and you know what I mean, it's a very easy bet fold for me on the turn, then I would be betting that too, is because I'm not going to be calling a raise with the flush draw on the turn. And at the same time, like if it's, I don't know, I guess I probably wouldn't be betting any. If I had like Ace-6 here on the turn with the open and straight draw, it'd also be a very easy bet fold. So I can see myself doing that too. But okay, guys, this has been CodeRed Rules. Thanks for attending, and thanks for attending. And we had a very good turnout last week on the GCS, and I hope to guys see you again in the GTS and the GCS. So, you know what? If you have any questions or comments, or if you guys have any other hands that you would like to be reviewed, go ahead and post them in this thread from that session. In just case I missed them, because I didn't get everybody's hands, for one. And two, some people I have a hard time going over. If you send me a hand histories in like one big massive file, I can't actually review those hands because just the way of the programs we have set up. Please like filter them out by table, which you can do in Hold'em Manager, and then export them by table and then send me those hands, because it's a lot easier for me to do that. Then I will actually be able to have your hand history played up here. But alright, guys, some CodeRed Rules. Good luck at the tables, and see you later. But alright, let's go on to the next hand.